Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. It's the first day of a new year, 2021, and what better way to kick off this new year than talking about Nvidia refreshes? Well, it's the way to kick it off anyway. That's right, Nvidia are allegedly going to be refreshing the RTX 30 lineup with supercards. We saw this, of course, for the RTX 20 series, but for very different reasons. For the RTX 20 series, Nvidia refreshed the lineup because they wanted to increase the value to customers. Basically, people were just kind of reluctant to jump onto the RTX 20 bandwagon, not least of which because they didn't feel that, for example, the RTX 2080 represented tremendous value for money over what we saw with Pascal. But with the RTX 30 series, Nvidia are in a very different position because the market is in a very different position. I.e., AMD released the RX 6000 series, and they are extremely competitive against Nvidia's lineup, not least of which because of the amount of VRAM which is on the 6800 series of cards. The 6800 and 6800 XT both possess 16GB of RAM, as I'm sure you know by now. So this has meant Nvidia are in a very weird position in the market. Up until quite recently, there were a lot of rumours that we would see the RTX 3080 launch with 20GB of memory, but then Nvidia quietly cancelled it. Of course, it wasn't officially confirmed, but it had leaked numerous times at this point, and I'd even been told that Nvidia had already procured the memory. But yeah, it was just cancelled, and we know that the RTX 3080 Ti is going to launch next year, which is basically the RTX 3090, albeit with a few small cuts here and there, which does make you wonder what's going to happen to the RTX 3090. Are they going to retire it, or is it going to be rebranded? I don't really know. But Kopity7 Kimmy has recently tweeted that Nvidia are definitely planning to launch super versions of the cards, and there have already been some hints at this, not least of which the mobile GPUs for Ampere. If you've been following along with the mobile, you'll know that there have been a couple of head scratchers. The biggest is that the RTX 3080, which is basically very similar in configuration to the RTX 3070 for desktop, complete with a 256-bit bus, comes in two different memory configurations, both 8 and 16GB, which, yeah, you kind of look at it and think, well, wait a minute, why on earth would desktop users get only the option for half the amount of memory of laptop users? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So the only logical conclusion you can come to was that either the mobile leaks were incorrect, although there are at least 2 or 3 at this point, which are all pointing to 16GB variants of the RTX 3080 for mobile, or that Nvidia are planning to do something for the desktop versions. And honestly, Kopity7 Kimmy leaking this just makes a lot of sense. Now, what those specs are, we don't know yet, but it honestly just is a logical thing for Nvidia to do. They are facing a ton of pressure from AMD. AMD's increased competitiveness is something that Nvidia needs to take note of. Now, fortunately, Nvidia are in a very good position. While the 8nm Samsung process is not as good as what AMD are utilising with TSMC's 7nm, the good news is that the Ampere architecture is pretty damn solid, so should carry them through until Lovelace, which is supposedly the RTX 40 series. But not only are they facing pressure in terms of performance, with the 6800 being really good. I've been doing a ton of testing recently of the 6800. I'm actually building an all AMD system at the moment, so apologies for the craziness in the background. But it also brings a ton of questions too to the software ecosystem from AMD and Nvidia. So while DLSS is something I love, I'm a strong proponent of DLSS as well as hardware-based ray tracing, and AMD definitely got there much later than Nvidia. In fact, they still haven't got there technically with their super sampling technology. Because it's used in a wide number of pieces of hardware, it's of course for the desktop, mobile, but also could be used for consoles too. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox both use it, and from what we understand, it's basically utilizing lower precision operations on the GPU for upsampling. How good it is, how fast it is, how accurate it is, we don't know yet. And it's not going to launch for a while. I'm hearing it's going to be late Q1 maybe even that it gets launched. Hopefully it's sooner, hopefully. But it does make you wonder how AMD will be able to nom into Nvidia's kind of software ecosystem in that respect. It could be a bit like the software version of FreeSync versus G-Sync. Now, I don't know if it's going to be quite like that. AMD's ray tracing solution is inferior to Nvidia's, but it's also present in the next generation consoles. So because of this, developers will have a really good understanding of how to optimize just on the RDNA 2 architecture for its ray tracing. I think it's going to be a really interesting couple of years in tech in terms of just seeing which of these standards stick. And of course, I believe that Nvidia are going to be absolutely fine in the long term. They're obviously going to continue to invest a ton of money in their own optimizations, and in my personal opinion, DLSS and, of course, their own software stack is not going anywhere. I'm just simply saying that they, for the first time, actually have a lot of competition in high-performance graphics. So I think this is one of the reasons that we're seeing the RTX 30 Super cards being launched, or at least assuming this information is correct. And Kopity honestly has a really good track record. So it seems like this year we're going to see the 30 refreshes, along with, of course, cards like the RTX 3080 Ti. And then next year is most likely going to be Lovelace. I don't think Lovelace is going to launch this year. I could be wrong. I'm not basing this off insider information. I just don't think it's going to be ready for this year, because originally Lovelace was supposed to not be a thing. It was supposed to be Hopper, which is obviously an MCM design. Then again, it also depends how early Nvidia did realize that they wouldn't have Hopper ready, and also how much of a departure Lovelace is compared to, let's say, what we have with Ampere. Lovelace is also supposed to be on the 5nm process, so just by virtue of a smaller process, they can pack in a ton of additional CUDA cores, as I just covered recently. So yeah, I think the graphics card market is going to be insane. Also, real quick, keeping on the subject of Nvidia, Lenovo are the latest company to do an oops, and have basically confirmed the existence of several different cards. They have confirmed the existence of the RTX 3060 Vanilla, the RTX 3050 Ti, as well as the RTX 3050 Vanilla. Now, of course, just because these are listed, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are, real cards, but the RTX 3060, from what we understand with the leaked specifications, has 3840 CUDA cores, and the RTX 3050 Ti cuts things down just slightly to 3584, whereas the RTX 3050 snips things further still to just 2304 CUDA cores, but perhaps, the most concerning thing is it only has 4GB of GDDR6 memory on a 128-bit bus. I'm not 100% convinced of 4GB of memory going into 2021, even for lower performance cards, simply because the VRAM that we can expect games to need is going to start shooting upwards. I think 6GB should be absolutely fine, especially at higher resolution 1080p, higher quality settings 1080p. That made way more sense in terms of texture quality and all that stuff. But yeah, we can argue about things like sampler feedback and all that jazz, but sometimes there's just no substitute, of course, for VRAM. So I personally don't know about only 4GB, even on a card like the RTX 3050. But then again, it is, of course, a budget solution and only has a TDP of like 90-ish watts. So I suspect it's going to find its home in kind of cheaper OEM solutions, or maybe for just kind of esports titles. And now I want to finish this video off with discussion of Rocket Lake. Now, I know many of you are not exactly super on board rocket ship on your way to Mars, but this processor may have a couple of nice things about it. The first is, for gamers anyway who don't necessarily care about power consumption, I know many of you do, but for those who just care about performance, then I think Rocket Lake has a really good chance of being the fastest gaming processor. How much that actually means to you, well, I'm going to leave that down to, well, you. The other benefit is that it may, depending on Intel's pricing strategy, actually force AMD to possibly lower the price. Intel don't have anything to compete with the 5900 processor, for example, 5950X, in terms of thread and core count, but the 8-core processors from AMD, those are CPUs that AMD could actually find themselves being targeted with aggressive pricing from Intel. So maybe that could be a good thing. We do actually have, though, a couple of additional benchmarks from Rocket Lake and also some temperatures too. So this information comes to us via chip hell, and here the processor is hitting 5.2 gigahertz all core. So it scores 706 points in single thread performance, and in terms of multi-thread it scores 7200 points. Well, technically 7198. Comparing this against benchmarks that Harikaze's 5719 has compiled, you can see that yes, the overclock results here actually do a decent job. Single core score goes up from 695 to 706, and the multi-core score goes from 6522 up to 7200. And of course, this means as well that the processor is now outperforming the 5800X. The temperatures here are not awful. They're not the best, but they're not awful. Looking at the core temps, we're looking at like high 50s, low 60s. Again, we don't know what cooling solution is being used here, at least to my knowledge. And yeah, it's not as good as what AMD's temperatures would be, especially under a decent cooler, but they're not honestly as awful as I was expecting. Although, of course, different workloads like heavy AVX over a sustained period is definitely going to start cranking up the heat of these processors, and that is definitely something to be concerned about. I'm kind of like 50-50 on Rocket Lake. I'm very interested in it from the perspective of like, well, honestly, I'm just a nerd and I want to play around with it. Just being really honest with you. I just want to play around with it and just see what it's actually capable of. I would love to compare it against like a 5800 or a 9900K and start doing some, just funky stuff with it. I'm not necessarily certain I would recommend it to the majority of people at the moment. But then again, if you're on like a Z490 platform and you purchased, I don't know, like a 10 700K, then it could be a decent upgrade. Ultimately, it's going to be down, as I've said a couple of times now, to A, pricing, B, availability, and it seems like these processors are not going to be available until March, which, like Intel, like you had an opportunity here, dude, like, you had an opportunity. You could have... I don't know, it just feels like the luck, the fortune of Intel is just always cursed. Because if they'd have actually had Rocket Lake available now, or just prior to Christmas, they probably would have sold a decent number because of the availability issues that AMD are facing. But it's just kind of like, yeah, I feel that the opportunity for Intel to have actually established themselves with Rocket Lake may have slipped by, but who knows what the availability of AMD's processors is going to be like. To make things worse, some of Intel's chipsets are apparently going through shortages. It's like... You got to admit, there's kind of like that funny irony of AMD's processors are in shortages, but you can get hold of the motherboards, whereas with Intel, it's completely the reverse. It's kind of funny. The good news is, though, for Intel, it's not affecting all of the motherboards, and the Z500 series boards, the 590s, they're probably going to be okay. Hopefully. But anyway, I'm also hoping you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then the normal stuff, of course, subscribe to the channel, and definitely click the like button on the video because it helps us out a ton. If you also subscribe, please make sure you click the bell icon because YouTube has a funny way of notifying people for videos, and it basically just doesn't most of the time. And so, anyway, thanks very much for watching, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.